course, is 1 part oxygen and 2 parts hydrogen, so the possibility of ice hiding below the surface in those areas is overwhelming. But while strong evidence of ice at the Martian poles may be relatively new, speculation that water existed there became common more than a century ago. And its implication that intelligent life could also exist on the red planet elicited widespread anxiety on Earth for much of the first half of the 20th century. Astronomers pointed the first telescopes toward Mars in 1610. As spyglass technology steadily improved, the blurred image of the red planet drew ever closer to the eyes of earthly observers. By 1877, telescopes could enlarge the image of the distant planet so that it appeared roughly the size of a dime held at arm's length. Certainly not impressive by modern standards, but it was enough for the director of the Milan Observatory, Giovanni Schiaparelli, to attempt to sketch the Martian surface and name its geological features. Schiaparelli peered at the hazy, shifting visage night after night for months.
And he sees what he thinks are crisscross lines on the surface of Mars. Turns out later, what he saw isn't exactly what's up there, but still through his crude telescope, that's what he could see.
The respected Italian astronomer sketched these lines and gave them a name.
Schiaparelli interpreted these lines as channels of some sort. He didn't really know. Well, the Italian word that he applied to them was canali. That word, translated to English, should have been translated as channels, but instead it got mistranslated as canals.
Since straight lines do not normally appear in nature, Schiaparelli's sketches gave birth to the idea that some form of intelligent life must exist on Mars. It was an arresting notion, widely debated among astronomers of the day. Later, in 1894, a wealthy Bostonian named Percival Lowell was so intrigued by this possibility that he paid to have a large telescope constructed on a mountainside in Flagstaff, Arizona. He spent the next 2 decades observing, sketching, and speculating about the red planet.
He convinced himself that he was seeing networks of straight lines on Mars, which he thought were canals. What was the big news of the day? The Panama Canal. That's what great planetary civilizations do. They build canals. So this was canals to bring the water down from the polar ice caps. Mars was cold and far from the sun and dry, and so he knew that, and so he thought, well, they have to move the water to live on Mars. Well, that idea just electrified everybody, that there was a civilization on Mars.
Against this backdrop, on Halloween night 1938, a young actor named Orson Welles broadcasted a dramatization of War of the Worlds, a novella by British author H.G. Wells, in which sinister Martians land on Earth and wreak havoc.
We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, here I am. Wait a minute, something's happening. There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. Lord, they're turning into flames.
Thousands of citizens believed the invasion was real.
You're deeply shocked and deeply regretful.
The misunderstanding was short-lived, but even so, the broadcast only served to fuel public speculation about potential intelligent life on Mars. Mars, it had intrigued humankind for thousands of years. And in the mid-20th century, humans finally got a closer look at the mysterious planet. In 1964, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, launched a small exploration spacecraft toward the red planet. Its name was Mariner 4. It had a television camera, and its mission was to fly past Mars and send back pictures. It could only make one pass. Scientists were filled with anxious excitement at the prospect of what they might see.
Is it going to see cities? Is it going to see canals? Is it going to see forests? Well, what it saw was craters. It sent back pictures which just were very fuzzy and showed craters like on the moon.
It was a huge letdown. The Mariner 4 images revealed a dry, cratered, desert-like, and seemingly dead planet.
Sort of like the moon with a little air to blow the dust around.
But the enthusiasm for exploring Mars was only tempered. And 6 years later, in 1971, NASA sent another spacecraft to the red planet, Mariner 9. But this time, rather than just making a single pass by Mars, Mariner 9 was engineered to orbit the planet for weeks and do a complete mapping. The effort paid off. After waiting out a planet-wide dust storm, Mariner 9 started returning spectacular images. It discovered the Tharsis Bulge, the sort of potbelly of the planet near the equator. The bulge is a result of concentrated and massive volcanic activity. The dominant feature of the Tharsis Bulge is the monster volcano, Olympus Mons.
Olympus Mons is about the size of Missouri. If you put it in the middle of the U.S., it would dominate that picture. If it had a major eruption, a volcano of that size would probably fill up one state on every side of Missouri. So my hometown in Iowa would be under lava. Interestingly, it's composed of, we think, 3 separate volcanoes, or at least it's erupted in 3 different ways. If you fly over the top, you see 3 separate calderas. So it isn't just 3 times larger. This is a monster geological event. But in fact, if you were on the edge, the slope is so gradual and the peak is more than 100 miles away that you wouldn't know that it was a volcano. It's that massive.
And Olympus Mons is not alone. A few hundred miles southeast of the mountain stands a diagonal row of 3 other evenly spaced enormous volcanoes, each larger than any of its type on Earth. Yet, as magnificent as it is, the Tharsis region isn't the only spectacular geological feature discovered by Mariner 9. At the eastern edge of the bulge is a colossal tear in the crust of the red planet. It's called Valles Marineris, Mariner Valley, in honor of the Mariner 9 orbiter itself.
You look at this thing, it is like the width of the United States. It's this cleaved valley. You know the Grand Canyon in the United States? Pump it up, put it on steroids, make it the size of the United States itself, you got Mariner Valley.
The geological mechanism that caused this immense rupture in the Martian surface is yet a mystery. Scientists can only speculate.
One mechanism which I like is that there's a place called the Tharsis Bulge not far away, in which so much lava and other things have accumulated that it's felt it could put a giant torque on the surface of Mars and pull this apart like a zipper. Well, who knows if that's true, but one needs a mechanism different from anything that we know to explain the existence of that.
With the stunning success of Mariner 9, the next logical step for NASA was to land a spacecraft on the actual surface of Mars. Scientists were eager to test rock and soil samples for signs of life. In 1976, the Viking mission reached the planet to do just that. It had both an orbiter and a landing component, equipped with robotic test instruments.
And we get right down on the surface and we scoop up some soil and we don't find a thing. Mars looks like a cold, dry, dead place.
But while the Viking lander toiled away on the ground, failing to make headlines, high above the Martian surface, the Viking orbiter managed to capture a mystifying image. While flying over a region of Mars called Cydonia, the orbiter snapped an image of a land formation under cross-lighting. Startlingly, the formation resembled a human face. As a joke, NASA scientists showed the photo to the press, remarking about the face they'd found on Mars. Under more even lighting conditions, of course, the Martian terrain feature does not look like a face at all, just a jumble of hills. But in certain circles, the story of the face on Mars and its NASA cover-up persisted for several years. True Mars enthusiasts, on the other hand, faced a more sober reality following the Viking mission. With no definitive evidence of biology resulting from the Viking experiments, interest in returning to the red planet quieted for several years. Then, in 1984, a young scientist on an expedition in Antarctica made a discovery that ultimately infused new energy and hope into the quest to uncover life on Mars. In December 1984, NASA geologists on a meteorite gathering expedition in Antarctica found an odd specimen. A meteorite with an unusual color, a sort of green hue. Most are gray or brown. Back at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, where such rocks are stored, it was labeled ALH 84001. Despite its odd color, the scientists assumed that it was a piece of an asteroid.
So the rock was pigeonholed into a group of meteorites, and it stayed there for 6 or 8 years. Misclassified.
Then, in the early 1990s, an analyst researching asteroids placed a piece of ALH 84001 under an electron microscope. He soon realized he was not looking at a normal meteorite. He was looking at a piece of Mars. The rock had characteristics that matched another Martian meteorite found in 1979. More scientists began studying this sample, and they were astonished when they eventually found what looked like carbon globules. Carbon, at least on Earth, is the primary building block of life.